Awesome. How's everybody? Fun discussion?
Sure.
Nice. Okay, so I heard, let's go one by one and see what comes up. Let's start with fresh baked brownies. What came up in those discussions? Somebody? You guys are smiling.
Alyssa started talking about pasta.
Those are very different.
Right? It made me think of like food in general. It reminded me of this time. I have this friend who's really good at cooking, and I made pasta, and he told me he could tell that I salted the water, and I just remember being like, what? And it made me think of the perceptual difference in our mastery of cooking.
That's cool. Even with like dishes that, like if you've never tasted a brownie before and you were like a master baker, you could probably still tell what was going on, right? There's this famous example in the history of statistics, which is a boring history. Actually, it's not. It starts off cool and then it gets boring. Where somebody was claiming, I guess the neighbor of the author was claiming that they could tell if you made tea with the water going in first or the milk going in first. And like she said, she could tell every single time that was the case. And so he did 8 cups of tea where each were different, and she was able to get them all. And so it was like, oh shit, okay. So there's somebody that can perceive the ordering of ingredients, which I can't even imagine being that good at something, let alone tea. Anything else come up with the brownie discussion?
Yeah, we kind of talked about, because I initially framed it as like just perception as a whole being like a combination of genes plus learning history. We kind of framed that in the context of brownies initially. And kind of the conclusion we landed on is that sort of 2 components, like someone who's really has like a baker is 10,000 hours in baking brownies and tasting brownies will have like a fundamentally different like phenomenological experience of the taste of the brownie. Like he'll he'll taste things in the brownie that just won't really be there for other people. They won't really be able to notice. But then also with that comes this like increasingly complex verbal repertoire for like distinguishing between those tastes, and you sort of start building up this entire language around the nuances of brownies, and which brownies are preferable to other brownies, or what's the best way to make a brownie, and get really specific. And we sort of saw that as being the divergence of experience. Like it's the actual raw experience plus like how do you describe that experience? And different regions might have entirely different ways of describing things.
That's cool. Because so different regions would describe things fundamentally differently because of how they group things or how they cluster, how they train, is the idea?
Well, I think we mostly talked about this in the context of like esports. So like, take any competitive game where there's multiple regions competing for like a world championship, and invariably every region will have its own sort of internal meta, which is to say that some strategies will just be preferred there, and they'll sort of take stock in that specific strategy, which sort of implies that, number one, they see the game kind of differently than people from other regions do. They'll notice different things and see an advantage where a player from another region might not see it. But they'll also describe it differently. And they'll have like different concepts built up around their perceptions about the game.
This is I'm gonna go back to the tasting for a bit and then hop back over to the first person shooter. Part of the reason that I like tequila and whiskey, and at a certain point I decided not to become a connoisseur because it just gets more expensive and you start liking the things that are cheaper less because now you can taste the difference. So I decided not to do that. But who knows? But the first person shooter, I think, takes us maybe to it's a natural segue to the fourth question about experiencing somebody that is a master in a hobby of yours. And that's a cool insight, the idea that as you build up expertise, you start clustering certain concepts. And if you are trained versus if you learn it alone, versus if you're trained by somebody completely differently, you might cluster your experience differently. And so you might genuinely perceive something fundamentally differently from another expert, right? That's why artists really love the people that are, quote, outside art, right? Outside artists, because they get really, really good at their craft, but they didn't get brought up in the same concepts that the rest of the world did. And as a result, it's new and invigorating way of dividing up the expertise. Does anybody want to talk about prompt 4, about a hobby of yours that that you get better at, or you can, I don't know. Yeah. Joseph?
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Saw someone else go active speaker, so I'm letting them take the lead.
Desmo.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I was going to say Claudina brought up a good point about how experiencing a work of mastery in your field of hobby is like very naturally becomes a learning environment. So like, which is indicative of a lot of things, I think. First, it shows that since you're more familiar with it, like you can't help but conceptualize yourself as a part of this activity. And then naturally, they are also the person you're watching. It's not just like this visceral experience, like, what is he doing? Maybe if you saw someone surfing for the first time ever, but it's more of like they, as an entity, are conceptualized within the hobby because they act as like maybe an exemplar or a prototypical example of something that's really good at it. Like if you see someone skiing and it's like usually old dudes with their skis completely parallel and they're just like bombing it. I don't know. It's like, it's very helpful because you see it and you're so familiar with it that you don't have to, like, your brain isn't busy sorting the sensation or like going through these phenomenal experiences for the first time, and instead you're kind of primed to see it as a conceptualized thing because you have concepts about it.
That's awesome. I just in the past couple of weeks decided that I was going to learn the guitar. And so I've been practicing like nonstop and going online, and like the same videos that used to freak me out before, now they're just like this much higher than me in my skill level relative, as opposed to like way beyond something I could even imagine. And so it's kind of cool seeing that transition from something that's like just you're in awe of a person to like still being in awe, but now like paying attention to how they're moving their fingers and what they're doing, which is kind of cool. I like that the transitioning into a learning experience just because you already have like a foothold in the hobby.
Yeah, I thought for the longest time that the compliment that something was phenomenal was pretty ironic once I learned what a phenomenon was, because it's just like a thing that happened. But then you realize it's phenomenal because it's like hitting you, viscerally as a sensation rather than hitting you as like this familiar concept which you are used to or have like thoughts about.
That's awesome. I like the way of thinking about that. Anybody have a thing on this, or Joseph?
Yeah. There is this guy on YouTube, Isaac Arthur. He just talks about science fiction stuff. That's just all he does. But there's this interesting phenomena that happens with this show that he's been doing that's been on for years, in that he'll run into a sci-fi concept because his whole shtick is, okay, this is a thing in sci-fi. Here's how to do it with actual science as far as we know. And he was talking about things like Trantor, right? A planet-wide city. And there wasn't a name for this planet, for this kind of concept. Everyone just knew, yeah, planet-wide city, like Coruscant. And he's like, oh, no, Ecumenopolis. Here's how I made it, since we're usually making it out of Greek. And now even video games use this terminology. He arbitrarily named the concept, and now that is the official name in the science fiction spheres for what a planet city is called. And even he's like, yeah, I kind of don't want to slap a name on this because it's going to become the name for this thing. I don't want to do that this time. And he's objectively an expert, but his at times almost arbitrary naming of things. Like he'll just say, okay, this guy did the math, so this is a Birch world. Birch did the math, Birch world. That's the name for that kind of structure that he's talking about now. And that's the thing that fascinates me, is that you'll run into these arbitrary snap decisions that become the tradition and praxis of these experts, which leads to these cultural differences. The concept of umami is just now breaking into Western cooking, but it's been in Asian cooking for generations, hundreds of years, you know?
That's fascinating that sometimes by giving a label to a thing, like I play chess with some regularity. And I remember the first time I learned the Queen's Gambit, and then the Queen's Gambit accepted or rejected. And I was like, oh my God, I've seen this so many times before. And then the moment I started like thinking about that term, it like opened up a branch of the game that I had never thought about before. But it goes the other way too, like having a concept or having a term for a concept canalizes your thinking. It makes it so that you are only thinking in terms of that concept from that point forward. It gets really hard to put yourself in the mindset of the amateur again.
Oh, I have a comment with
Let's
that
go.
one. Okay. So at my work, I sometimes do cashier, right? And when I'm giving change, I'll say like, or the total, I'll be like, it's 100 with 64 cents instead of and. Just because in Spanish, you say the translated word is with, not and. So I'll say that, and my manager, he was next to me once, and he was like, you and Elizabeth, another non-English, like first language speaker, says with as well. And he's like, you and Elizabeth, you guys both say with instead of and da 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 da. And then he said it to the both of us at the same time. Like we were both there to experience this. And the other day, like weeks later, I was telling her, you know, every time I do this, I just think about Sanjay and how he said that we say and, not with. And she's like, bruh, I know, like it was just this thing, like, and now we just think about it, and it's like, it's hard.
It's a thing. I mean, you can do it horribly to people. Like you can label a behavior that they have, and they will forever become conscious of that behavior. It's fucked up.
Yeah. I now like sometimes like stutter when I reach that point, and it's like my mind is trying to decide on which one to say. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the things that like middle school bullies were like really, really good at, just like naturally. And then the rest of us, you learn to shut that part of your mind down. But no, like labeling things can make them very salient. You always perceive it. You group the world that way. What about listening to a language you can't quite place?
I mean, we didn't talk about it too much as a group, but I can go off on it if nobody else wants to.
Just say a quick thing, yeah.
Well, when you're listening to a language you don't really comprehend, at least with me, there's this point where it becomes a sort of human-produced white noise. Like your brain has given up on that as a comprehensible thing. But I study language. That's kind of the big thing that I do, obviously, right, with the conversations I've offered. But when you start to pick up like the basic grammatical structure or some of the core words like conjunctive things, you wind up picking that out, and then you don't get to that white noise bit. So then you start trying to make context clues like you do with your L1 when you're still a kid. And I think that process is fascinating to me.
I was going to try to quickly find it, but I can't. There's a video there's several videos on YouTube where it tells you what English sounds like to non-native speakers. So it uses all of the phonemes of English, but like none of the words actually are words, but the actors are pretending like they are. And so you're like listening and you like almost are trying to place it and you can't. It's fascinating.
That's what I said in breakout groups. I was talking
Did
about
you?
those videos and no one had seen them.
I found them. I found them. I can link them, but I
Yeah,
need to figure out how
put them
to.
on the chat, please.
I'm trying
Yeah.
to. I'm stuck on sending stuff to you privately. I don't know how to get out of that.
Just send it to me and I'll send it to the chat.
All right.
So the last one, I really enjoyed a couple of people's conversations on the interpreting snide comments. And a couple of groups really like honed in on that one as the most interesting one. So does any group in particular want to jump on that one?
We talked about how deciding what is and isn't a snide comment is a sort of perceptual thing. But once that's been decided, the rest of like how you deal with snide comments is sort of depends more on your emotional disposition and how our perception of things like directly affects us emotionally, which seems intuitive, but yeah.
No, it was great. I definitely, like, I wanted that emotion comment to come out because it's funny to me in this class, I always try to think about how to structure it. And I always think, damn it, we need that background before we discuss this. But like, because everything is connected, we need all of the background before we discuss everything. So we're not discussing emotions for a while, but they keep coming up again and again, right? And emotions are this weird, fascinating cluster of properties that can affect your entire perception. You could, like, I'm not sure if it can affect your concepts, but maybe emotions could. They can definitely affect how you perceive the world and what you cluster in as a snide versus a not snide comment. Yeah. Anything else anybody want to say on any of the prompts or on anything? Awesome. That was fun. Thank you guys. Yeah. Next week we get into biology a little bit, just a little bit, and then we delve into it. Oh, Joseph sent me some links. I'm gonna put them on the chat.
Sorry about the wait. Kind of had to vet them, to let them play a little bit to see if they were actually the videos.
Cool. That works. Yeah, so check those out. And I'll see everybody next week.
Hi,
Later.
Carlos.
Yeah.
It's a good
I'll
one.
be sending
Everybody.
you the message with the Bee Gees audio illusion too as soon as I can find the best one because there's like tons of them.
Oh, Carlos, I looked on Canvas and it still says that I have a 0 out of whatever for those 3
Yes, you have to
quizzes.
take them again. They're open, I think.
It didn't look like they were.
Let's see. Tutor T 0, and it's consciousness reading and illusion of conscious will, right?
And I think it's decision making.
Oh, sorry, I'm just on the, I realized I am on the reading section rather than both of them. So moderate this quiz. It says you finished in less than a minute, but I'm giving you an extra attempt. I guess I'll just go one by one. So it's both consciousnesses. Let me stop the recording.